a fictionalized version of real-life author Miguel de Cervantes is imprisoned by the Spanish Inquisition, where he performs a play to convince his fellow inmates of the importance of hope amidst a cynical and pain-filled world, in the 1972 adaptation of the Broadway play Man of La Mancha, starring Peter O'Toole and Sophia Loren. And that's the film we've dug up this week on Movie Bones.
He lays down the melancholy burden of sanity and conceives the strangest project ever imagined, to become a knight-errant. No longer will he be playing Alonso Quijana, but a dauntless knight known as Don Quixote de la Mancha.
That is Miguel de Cervantes, as played by Peter O'Toole. He's faced with giving entertainment for his fellow inmates who have been imprisoned by the Spanish Inquisition.
The Spanish Inquisition.
Sorry, folks, I'm contractually obliged to play that. It's the law of the universe. So he goes about telling the story of Don Quixote de la Mancha. And if you watch the assignment with us, you know it too now. Man goes mad, thinks he's a knight-errant, and goes tilting at windmills, which is a phrase I don't think quite does justice to the inspiration of that triggered it, at least in the way it's portrayed in the play, which I think is much more positive. But we can get to that a little bit more later on. First, I have to say that given the state of the country that we're in right now and the times we're going through, which can be pretty dark right now, at least in terms of, everything that's going on. As of this recording in late October 2024, you guys are going to be listening to this later after the election. But I really need this film. It was cathartic to hear someone give voice to the kind of impassioned defenses for what I would call right-ordered lunacy, for lack of a better term, because when things look really bad, I think striving for basic decency in spite of all that does kind of make you a lunatic, kind of the best kind, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that statement.
So where do you start out with this, man?
So I didn't actually know much. I don't know why I've never really paid too much attention to Don Quixote. And now that I realize what it is, like, not what it is, but like more of how the character is. But I thought this was a pretty beautiful film. I like what they're doing. I like that it's based off a play, this particular movie. Play based off a book, and the movie itself is like a play within a play. And I just think that's... I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've never read the original Miguel de Cervantes Tales of Don Quixote. In the little reading that I was able to do on it before we started recording, it seems that there was like a series of tales that he kind of compiled together in a couple parts at least, maybe more. It didn't quite have the ending that the movie does, obviously, because the movie is kind of taking the author and putting him into the work, so such as it is. I think that when in the movie he's telling the story of Don Quixote, I think he's kind of condensing things. There are basic beats, but ultimately the story inside the story is there to serve what's going on in the middle ground. It's kind of like Inception, it's like which layer of the dream you're in, So it's like, because you start out in the prison, Miguel de Cervantes, he's in the prison, and he's kind of, because they're holding his manuscript hostage, he says, like, this is a very valuable thing. It's like, they're getting ready to burn it. He's willing to try to convince them, have a trial where he has to convince them that this is worth saving, that this is something that they should give back to him. And he pulls it off. But the way he does it, because this is a jail full of really cynical folk, the fact that, it's like they don't short shrift it either. That's one of the things I like about it. They don't give short shrift to the kind of misery that each of them is going through. I mean, in particular to Aldonza, who is also Dulcinea. And the trials that all of them have likely gone through, because let's face it, the time of the Spanish Inquisition was not a time of justice, was it?
No, it was not. It's, religious persecution to the highest degree. Which is unfortunate because I'm going to get off real quick into my realm of expertise. Clearly is not what the ultimate figurehead of Christianity would have ever wanted, would have ever even advocated for. Obviously not. But this is evil people. I'm going to say it, outright call it evil people who co-opted a sect of Christianity and co-opted the words of Christ himself to commit to evil acts.
Yeah.
which is unfortunate.
The great thing about it, though, is that you can take this film and you can put it in any, you can show it in any time frame and still it doesn't lose any of its importance. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with it. Yeah, definitely. And that's like, there are things that we watch that can lose their importance, obviously, because like we're not dealing with the same things. But yeah, you're right. This is one of those things that you definitely, like, the importance is still there. And that's what makes it so beautiful.
It's transcendent.
What makes it so beautiful. Yes.
I think if I was to compare this movie to like other films I've seen that I also like as well for very similar reasons too. It made me think of like, you have Les Miserables.
I think you were getting at is like, these are important critiques of the world and the worlds that these people are living in. But these critiques do transcend because we're meant to look at them and go, let's never get to that point again.
Let's never do that again. I mean, and you haven't read it yet, but I mean, in Les Mis, of course, you're during the time period of the French Revolution, or in that interperiod where where they were transitioning between monarchy and democracy. That very messy time period. But I was just thinking, like, when it came to Les Mis, about how during that, it's like you can look at the time period and what they're going through, and the darkness that they're going through, and you can see reflections of things that still apply today in our society. But there's also another movie I was thinking, was it Dead Poets Society? I'm pretty sure you've seen that one, right?
Oh, yeah. I love that movie.
I love that one, too. And similar theme, again, of having, like, where the world outside doesn't see value in kind of like the literary arts or things that don't have any tangible physical value. It's a different kind of cynicism, but it's still cynicism. Yeah. And Robin Williams' character, of course, he's had like the Don Quixote task of trying to infuse in these kids against all the pressures of the world to put a high value on these very important things that aren't exactly tangible. And Don Quixote is fighting for that too in his own crazy way.
Really, what the movie did for me was, it just made me think about. It really made me think about how we treat other people. And everything. And I know that's what a lot of movies can be about, but it just made me think more about how we treat other people. And, sometimes how, like, you have that person that's there who, like, because I like the way they presented this, but, the actor who played Don Quixote in the film, that specifically, Don Quixote looks at it as a castle and the other person looks at it as, an actual inn. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of the other guy, but it does not mean that Don Quixote's vision is gone or his perception is gone. It's brought up. And, Don Quixote, we learn that he's a eccentric guy. He sees something, even if it's not there, even if he knows it's not there. And his partner is willing to commit to the bit as well. And, like, there's this question that's asked, and it's like, why do you do this? And it's like, because I like the guy. And there's a whole song about it. And, like, you learn from that. It's like, yes, that he's eccentric. Yes, but he's not harming anybody.
No.
And he's bringing, like you've already kind of pointed out, he's bringing light to this dark little world that we live in.
Yes.
And it is. He's making this fantastical reality where he's this gallant knight who is willing to save the damsel in distress, who's willing to stand up to injustices of all kinds because there is injustice and because people need to put good in the world. And it just made me think, like, we don't honor that kind of thinking like we should.
No.
Because more often than not, and maybe it is more often than not, but more often than not, we look at people that have that way of looking at life from a lens that is pure imaginative and also good, and putting on them, oh, they're just crazy.
And yeah. And I think what's really great about him having be apparently to the world crazy, but is that having that very simpler, stripped back mindset, he kind of removes all the barriers to seeing people for who they are, like Dulcinea, right? Or, to see her, nobody else sees her as a human being. No, let's call a spade. They see her as an object. Yeah.
An object to be won and an object to be paraded around and done with however they please because they're men and everything. And when he comes in, he treats her like the fair maiden, and she kind of at first, and like this is another beautiful thing about this film. There's no love connection between these two.
No. Not at all.
It's not hinted at. It's not alluded to, he's just the good knight, and she's just the person that benefits from his goodness. By the end of the film, what you learn, the end of the story, not really the end of the film, but the end of the story. By the end of the story, his goodness has completely turned her life around.
It goes to show you how goodness works. If someone just comes to you and offers you something, well, like it just gives you for free, just the dignity and respect that everyone should get. It's like the epitome, I was going to say, it's like the epitome of chivalry as it was supposed to be. You know, as what we were all told about the chivalry in about the time of knights and whatever. It's like that's what we were told it was supposed to be. And he embodies that. Like Cervantes says later, is like to see junk and see value in it.
Life itself seems lunatic. Who knows where madness lies? Perhaps to be too practical is madness. To surrender dreams, this may be madness. To seek treasure where there is only trash. Too much sanity may be madness. And maddest of all, to see life as it is and not as it should be.
That whole sequence he does there really got me thinking so much about the perspective of things. You know, it's like to just be focused so much on the material aspects of life, you know, and to be completely divorced of all these other things we're talking about. That the insane can actually be more sane. Not guaranteed. Obviously, there's plenty of examples of that not being the case. But like I said, qualitatively.
Well, the thing is it's an absolutely correct statement because, I mean, like, you know, look at us if we do the same thing every day. And it's not the actual definition, but they, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and again, expecting different results.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, sometimes that's what life is. We do the same thing over and over every single day, and we call it routine. And then we say, or then we expect, well, maybe this day will be better. Maybe this day will be different. And we don't ever give ourselves time for our creative outlets. We don't give ourselves time to relax and just be, to live. Let's be real. That's what it is. It's like we don't give ourselves time to live, and then we'll say, well, we don't have time. It's like, yeah, I know. We do live in a world more often than not that does feel like, it takes more and more of our time to do certain things,
mm-hmm.
which is unfortunate. But that doesn't mean that we need to stop trying to live in some way, form, or fashion. That's what he's talking about in that clip, is he's saying, like, we got to give ourselves time to live. And sometimes living means that we're pushing buttons, even if we're not trying to push buttons.
To live is not the same thing as to possess life, right?
Yes,
that's
exactly.
It. How often do we just go about our lives and it's like you just don't even, it's like and people are just like the objects sometimes. They pass around you and they move around, but they're just like moving objects. It factors into so many parts of life. And this movie is such a rebellion against that. To bring it back to the movie, it is such a rebellion against that kind of thinking, against the kind of drudgery, the negativity. The world is terrible and broken, and you just have to accept it for what it is. And everyone just goes around like a zombie. This movie says, forget that.
I think Don Quixote is brother to Cervantes.
God help us. We are both men of La Mancha. For me alone was Don Quixote born, and I for him. I give him to you.
Yeah, we need these works like what he's talking about. It's almost like where we've been talking about the communal nature of art. Not that we have to share our work, but when we do make it to share, it's like we need that kind of a thing as a way to remind each other of who we are and the dignity we're made for. Because despair and cynicism, it's only just too easily to become a bottomless pit, and the world is constantly trying to trip us or shove us into that pit, and there's no bottom to it. That's the scary part. The good news is that there's a way out. But that to me at the end is like, it actually add an extra layer of depth for the movie at the end, where it's like he actually brings it in as a commentary on the art itself. I was going to say, just for the sake of discussion, it's like is it just me, or did popular media kind of feel like it became shy about making new films about like this? You don't see too many of these films anymore. At least I haven't seen them, but I'm not always looking for them either. But do you know of any, Ryan? Is there any like those films out there that you think of like more within the last 10 years or so?
I mean, not off the top of my head, but like, because then I will say, like, a lot of it is that fear of making something like this, that it might not go over well, might not make money, and that's unfortunately what a lot of creative space is about now, is just making money.
Yeah.
And that does stifle creation. It stifles creativity because there are people it's the people that want to control the creative space that are hurting the creatives.
Yeah. AI just doesn't cut it, does it?
Yeah. No.
No.
It's fun to play around with, but it's not fun to use to actually, put out actual work and everything.
And that's the thing is, if you're using AI as some kind of way to make art, just even if it's just for yourself, I suppose, okay, but is it going to satisfy you? I have sincere doubts about satisfaction, because part of the satisfaction comes from actually putting your hand to the wheel,
Yeah.
That's a critical part. Some of the movies that we already mentioned, but you got to go back pretty much, mostly by decades to find them. If you guys are listening in and know of any other films that, Ryan and I should be checking out that within like more modern films, we're not going to cover them on the show, but it would be nice to at least have them to watch and maybe even compare them to some of this other stuff we're watching. So if you guys feel like that there's something out there we're missing, please do tell us. Final verdict, man. Where are you going to land?
Fortune and glory, because you know what? He wasn't after fortune or glory, but he was out to do something that brought him fortune and glory. Fortune being, the fortune of friendship, the fortune of adventure, and the glory of knowing he put good into the world.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a fortune and glory for me.
Oh, yeah. Same here. For the performances, the strength of its themes, which are ennobling and inspiring. And just for providing me a much-needed sense of hope amidst, the difficulties we're all kind of going through right now. This movie is a balm for the soul, something I felt lighter after watching it. This one is going to go on the short list of films I want to have physical copies of. So yeah, Fortune and Glory. Now's the time when we'd like to remind the listening audience out there that if you're watching these movies alongside us, and you should be, and hearing our reactions, please do like, subscribe, comment, and of course, follow us on your podcast purveyor of choice. Tell us what you think we got wrong, because we're not perfect. Maybe nominate some films you'd like us to see too, especially if they're available for free, because this adventure comes with no strings attached. Guaranteed. In any case, Ryan and I thank you for sticking with us on this shared journey. And on that note, Ryan, what is the next week's assignment? What are we all going to watch next week?
Next week's film is titled I Know Where I'm Going. It's a 1945 dramatic comedy about a young woman who gets waylaid on her way to marry her older fiancé and starts having second thoughts. Probably a good idea. This is starring Wendy Hiller, George Carney, and Walter Hudd. Directed by Michael Powell.
I've never heard of this one before. You brought this one up on the list on the list of things to suggestions, and I was like, I have never heard of this before, and I don't even know the actors, the director, anybody, or anything. We're totally winging on this one.
Samesies.
Well, that's what this is for. I guess that's about it. Until next week, we'll see you guys out there, and Ryan, next week I'll see you.
Well, Sir Knight, I'm going to bed.